It started not with a bang, but with a thwack. The sound was sharp, plasticky, and held a note of profound self-importance. It was the sound of a clipboard striking the brand-new cedar post of my half-finished deck. I was on the phone at the time, standing in my cavernous, echoey living room trying to convince my mother that my recent life choices hadn't been orchestrated by a head injury. "No, Mom, I'm telling you, it's great," I said, my voice bouncing off the bare drywall. "The air is cleaner. I have a yard. The mortgage is manageable. It's the American dream, or at least a high-interest facsimile thereof. It's just so far, Alex," she said, her voice tinny through the phone's speaker. "What if you need something? What if you need a good cannoli? You can't get a good cannoli in the suburbs." "I'm a hydrogeologist, Mom, not a mob boss. My cannoli needs are surprisingly infrequent." I paced over to the large picture window that overlooked my new kingdom, a 0.3-acre patch of aggressively green turf. Out back, two guys who looked like they'd been assembled from a kit labeled "construction dudes" were wrestling with a circular saw. That's when I heard it again. Thwack! "What was that?" my mother asked. "I think a woodpecker just filed a grievance," I muttered, squinting. Standing at the edge of my property line, where the pristine lawn met the churned-up mud of my construction site, was a woman. She was maybe in her late 50s, dressed in a beige pantsuit so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. Her hair was a helmet of blonde defiance, seemingly immune to the July humidity. And in her hand, she held the source of the noise, a clipboard. She was tapping it against the post again, a rhythmic, judgmental beat. "Mom, I gotta go. A wild Karen has appeared in my yard. I think I need to throw a pokeball at it." "Don't be fresh, Alex," she said before I hung up. I slid open the glass door and stepped out into the humid embrace of a Virginia summer. The scent of cut lumber and fertilizer hung in the air. The two contractors, a huge silent man and a wiry younger one, had stopped working and were staring at the woman with the kind of dread usually reserved for IRS audits. "Can I help you?" I asked, aiming for a tone I like to call politely confused future neighbor. The woman pivoted with military precision. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, scanned me from my worn-out sneakers to my messy brown hair. She did not smile. "Are you the owner of this property?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but it had an edge, like a scalpel wrapped in silk. "I am," I said. "Alex Peterson. Just moved in." I offered a hand. She eyed it as if I'd just used it to scoop something out of a sewer. "Carol Miller," she said, ignoring my hand. "President of the Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association." She gestured with her clipboard toward the large white truck parked on the street. "Your contractors." "Yes," I said, looking over at Big Mike, the silent mountain of a man, and Skinny Pete, his apprentice, who was now pretending to be fascinated by a screw in his hand. "Their vehicle is parked 3.5 inches too far from the curb," Carol announced. "A clear violation of Bylaw 117C regarding the proper street-side alignment of commercial vehicles during approved construction periods." I blinked. I looked at the truck. I looked at the curb. I looked back at her. Was she serious? Did she carry a tape measure in that beige pantsuit? "Right," I said slowly. 3.5 inches. I'll have them nudge it." She gave a curt nod, as if I had just passed a very minor test, but she wasn't done. Oh, she was far from done. Her gaze shifted to the beautiful, warm-colored cedar planks stacked by the house. "And this," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "is a more serious matter." She tapped the wood stack. Thwack. "The stain you've selected for the deck. Cedar sunset, I presume?" I was genuinely impressed. "Yeah, actually, how did you know?" It is the most common non-compliant shade chosen by new residents who fail to consult the Harmony Creek Architectural and Beautification Guidelines before commencing work, she said, as if reciting a sacred text. Cedar Sunset is not on the approved Earth and Harmony palette. My brain stalled. The what? The Earth and Harmony palette, she repeated, her patience visibly fraying. Permissible shades for all outdoor wooden structures are gentle taupe, subtle greige, and whispering sandstone. My own internal monologue, a sarcastic, unhelpful narrator that had gotten me into trouble more than once, kicked into high gear. Whispering sandstone? Does the sandstone whisper HOA regulations? Does it tell you you're a disappointment to your parents because you can't find a good cannoli? Outwardly, I tried to rally. But I got a permit from the county. They saw the plans, the materials, everything. It's all approved. Carol Miller actually let out a small, dry laugh. It was a terrifying sound, devoid of all humor. The city's approval, she said, making air quotes with her fingers, is merely a suggestion. The HOA's is law. She pulled a pink slip of paper from her clipboard and handed it to me. It was a violation notice. Fine, $150 for the parking, and a separate $500 fine for the unapproved stain, subject to a $1.50 per day penalty until remedied. Remedied? I stammered. You want me to, what, restain the whole thing in subtle greige? Precisely, she said. We value aesthetic unity here, Mr. Peterson. It's what keeps our property values high and our community harmonious. She gave one last, withering look at my half-built deck, as if it had personally offended her ancestors, turned on her sensible heel, and marched back toward her own immaculately landscaped property 2 houses down. I stood there, pink slip fluttering in my hand, the scent of non-compliant cedar in my nostrils. Big Mike lumbered over, his expression unreadable. Skinny Pete scurried up behind him. So, you want me to nudge the truck? Pete asked, his voice squeaky. I looked at the fine, at my beautiful cedar, at the retreating beige pantsuit of my new neighborhood overlord. Peace and quiet. The American dream. Yeah, Pete, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Nudge the truck. My dream was already turning into a nightmare, and it was painted the color of taupe. Fuming, I stalked across my lawn, pink violation slip clutched in my fist like a declaration of war. My destination was the house next door, a modest but tidy rancher with a profusion of petunias so vibrant they looked photoshopped. An older guy in a faded fishing tournament t-shirt and cargo shorts was meticulously watering them. He looked up as I approached, his face crinkling into a friendly, weathered smile. Hey there, he said, letting the hose droop. You must be the new fella. I'm Dave. Alex, I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. I held up the pink slip. I think I just met the welcoming committee. Dave's friendly expression evaporated. He let out a sigh so deep and ancient it seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 suburban grievances. Ah, he said, his eyes locking onto the paper. You've been Millered. Millered? Carol Miller, our glorious leader, he said, shutting off the water. Yeah, that's her signature move. The welcome wagon violation, let me guess. Your contractor's truck? And the stain on my deck, I added. Apparently, Cedar Sunset is the color of rebellion around here. Dave actually chuckled at that, a wheezing, genuine sound. Son, you have no idea. Come on. He beckoned me toward his back porch, which was a comfortable, cluttered space filled with a gas grill, a few mismatched chairs, and a cooler. He kicked the cooler with his foot. Beer? It's 10:30 in the morning, I said. And, he replied, already popping the top on 2 cold bottles. You're gonna need it. He was right. I sat down as Dave settled into a creaky wicker chair. He took a long pull from his beer and looked at me with the weary eyes of a man who had seen too much. "Let me tell you about Carol Miller," he began, leaning forward like a campfire storyteller about to share a chilling tale. "I've lived here 20 years, seen 3 HOA presidents before her. They were all pains in the neck, sure. Complained about grass height, garbage cans left out too long, standard stuff. But Carol is different. She's not just a president. She's an artist, and her medium is misery." He took another swig of beer and started ticking off points on his fingers. It was an impromptu presentation I'd later come to think of as the gospel according to Dave. "First, there was the Mailbox Standardization Act of 2019, he said, holding up one finger. Overnight, every mailbox in the neighborhood was declared non-compliant. Had to be replaced with a specific $400 model from a company her brother-in-law just happened to own. Black, post-mounted, with a little gold flag. Mine was a perfectly good brick-enclosed one. Had to sledgehammer it myself." He held up a second finger. Then came the Great Wind Chime Purge of 2021. She passed a bylaw classifying them as unregulated sonic pollution. Sent her husband, poor bastard, around with wire cutters to personally snip down any offenders. You could hear the sad little tinkle, tinkle, snip all down the street. It was a massacre. A third finger joined the others. Last year was the mandatory seasonal wreath program. You couldn't just put up any Christmas wreath. Oh no. It had to be from the approved vendor list. 3 choices. All of them looked like they were made of twigs and despair, and all of them cost $80. He shook his head, a look of grudging admiration on his face. "The woman's a tyrant, but you have to admit she's thorough." "So what, everyone just goes along with it?" I asked, incredulous. "What are you gonna do?" Dave shrugged. "Most people just want to grill in peace. They pay the fine, repaint their fence, take down the basketball hoop. It's easier than fighting her. She feeds on conflict. It gives her strength. She holds all the power on the board. It's stacked with her cronies who are either too scared to defy her or just as crazy as she is." I stared into my beer bottle, the condensation cold against my hand. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor. This was a systemic problem, a tiny, beige-colored dictatorship nestled in the heart of suburbia. Dave leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Just wait till she gets a new bee in her bonnet. Last year she tried to argue that the squirrels were aesthetically inconsistent and proposed a humane trapping and relocation program. We barely voted that one down." He gestured with his beer bottle toward the corner of my property. "This year? Who knows? I saw her staring at the fire hydrant on the corner the other day. Just staring. Making notes on that damn clipboard. God help us all." He took a final, long swallow of beer and looked me dead in the eye. "So, what are you gonna do about your deck, kid?" I thought about the $500 fine. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated gall of the woman. I'm a man of science. I deal in flow rates, water pressure, and geological surveys. My world is governed by physics and verifiable data. The idea of capitulating to a reality governed by something called the earthen harmony palette made my teeth ache. A spark of defiance, cold and clear as the beer in my hand, ignited in my chest. "I'm not painting a damn thing," I said. Dave grinned, a wide, beautiful, gap-toothed grin. He raised his bottle in a toast. "Attaboy," he said, his voice full of weary delight. "She's gonna eat you alive." A few days passed in a tense, silent standoff. My deck construction continued, a monument to the beautiful, non-compliant glory of Cedar Sunset. I'd sent a polite, professionally worded email to the HOA board, complete with scanned copies of my city-approved permits, arguing my case. The response was a 2-sentence email from Carol herself. informing me that my fine was now accumulating its $1.50 a day late penalty. Every time I saw her beige sedan drive by, it felt like a silent, slow-motion drive-by shooting aimed at my morale. I was trying to put it out of my mind. I worked from home, and my job often involved long, complex conference calls about things that would put most people into a coma. I was deep into one such call, pacing my office while discussing the comparative merits of ductile iron versus PVC piping for a new water line in Phoenix, when a flash of movement outside my window caught my eye. It was Carol. Of course it was Carol. She was standing on the public grass verge by the street corner, right next to the fire hydrant Dave had mentioned. The hydrant was a standard-issue model, short, stout, and painted a bold, unapologetic, life-saving red. It was a perfectly respectable-looking fire hydrant. But Carol was staring at it with an expression of profound disgust, as if it had just told a crude joke at a funeral. She wasn't alone. With her was a kid who couldn't have been more than 17, wearing a green t-shirt with Larry's Landscaping and Lawn Care printed on the back. He looked nervous and out of his depth, holding a wrench so large it looked like it could be used to dismantle a battleship. So the primary consideration for the substrate analysis will be seismic resilience, a voice droned from my laptop speaker. I wasn't listening anymore. I was transfixed by the bizarre tableau unfolding on the corner. Carol pointed a commanding finger at the hydrant. The landscaping kid, with visible reluctance, attached a wide, flat hose to one of the hydrant's side nozzles. The other end of the hose snaked over the curb and disappeared into the gaping maw of a storm drain. My blood went cold. No, she wouldn't. With another stern gesture from Carol, the kid fitted the giant wrench onto the operating nut on top of the hydrant. He strained, his skinny arms trembling. There was a groan of protesting metal. And then it happened. A gush of water, clear and powerful, exploded from the hose, a torrent of pressurized city water blasting directly into the sewer. It was loud enough that I could hear the roar of it through my closed window. Alex? You still with us?" the voice on my laptop asked. I dropped the call without a word, the laptop clattering onto my desk. I didn't even bother with shoes. I sprinted out my front door, the unmowed grass cool beneath my bare feet, my mind screaming a single, frantic question. Why? "What in the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I reached them, my voice cracking with disbelief. The roar of the water was immense. Carol turned to me, her expression one of utter, serene calm. She had to raise her voice to be heard over the deluge. "Mr. Peterson, I see you've decided to join our little community improvement project." "Community improvement? You're dumping thousands of gallons of clean water into the storm sewer. That's a fire hydrant. You can't just drain it," I yelled, gesturing wildly at the unfolding environmental and public safety disaster. "This is a sanctioned beautification maintenance procedure," she declared. As if that explained everything. This hydrant, with its garish crimson hue, is a blight on our community's visual landscape. It is being decommissioned. I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. I looked at the landscaping kid who was watching us with wide, terrified eyes, his hands still on the wrench as if he had been frozen in place. "Decommissioned?" I repeated, my voice now a strangled squeak. "It's city property. It's for fighting fires. You know, the things that burn down the houses you're supposedly protecting the property values of?" Carol sighed, a long put-upon sound. "We have an excellent fire response time from the county station. And besides," she added, her voice dropping as if sharing a profound secret, "it clashes with the petunias." She pointed to a bed of perfectly manicured pink flowers across the street. I stared at the petunias. I stared at the torrent of water. I stared back at her face, a mask of unshakable, insane conviction. "The committee has approved a lovely, decorative fiberglass rock to go in its place," she continued, her voice filled with visionary pride. It's a tasteful gray granite finish, much more in keeping with the earthen harmony. I stood there, speechless and barefoot on the grass, watching the last of the pressure sputter from the hose. The hydrant gave a final, sad gurgle and fell silent. The roar was replaced by an unnerving quiet, punctuated only by the distant buzz of Skinny Pete's sander. Carol gave the now limp hydrant a satisfied nod. She'd won. She'd defeated the ugly red monster. I looked at her, at the clueless kid, at the dark, wet stain spreading around the storm drain. I realized in that moment that I wasn't dealing with a reasonable person. I wasn't even dealing with a petty tyrant. I was dealing with a mad queen in a pocket dimension of her own creation, a kingdom of beige where aesthetics were all that mattered. And she had just declared war, not on my deck, but on basic, fundamental public safety. My polite emails and logical arguments were useless here. This was going to require a different approach. This was going to require a specialist. I retreated to my house, my feet damp, my mind a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. I slammed the door behind me and went straight to my office, a room still littered with unpacked boxes of textbooks and geological maps. This was my turf. She had her bylaws and her clipboards, but I had a Master of Science in hydrogeology and a decade of experience consulting for municipal water systems. This was my wheelhouse. My hands flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the public-facing city websites and logged directly into the professional engineering portals I had access to. I pulled up the schematics for the Harmony Creek Estates subdivision. The digital blueprints bloomed across my screen, a web of blue and green lines. And there it was, worse than I thought. The entire neighborhood, all 200-odd homes, wasn't just on a simple grid. It was a closed-loop system, a single, isolated water circuit designed for pressure consistency. It branched off a massive 12-inch city water main at the entrance to the subdivision, snaked its way around every cul-de-sac, and then just stopped. It didn't reconnect to another main on the other side. It was a hydraulic cul-de-sac. The fire hydrants weren't just individual taps into a larger system. They were the pressure regulators, the safety valves for the entire loop. Draining one, especially the one at the corner, the first on the line, was like pulling the plug on the whole thing. Carol hadn't just decommissioned one hydrant. She had effectively depressurized the emergency fire suppression system for the entire community. If a house caught fire now, the firefighters would hook up their hoses and get nothing but a sad, asthmatic hiss. My fury solidified into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. This had gone far beyond ugly decks and petty fines. This was dangerous. This was staggeringly, monumentally stupid. I knew who I had to call. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name, Janice Riley. We'd come up together as junior consultants at a big engineering firm years ago, before she'd taken a job on the public side. She was now a high-level manager at the Regional Water Authority, the very entity that owned the pipes Carol had so cavalierly violated. She picked up on the second ring. Alex Peterson. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're calling to gloat about that Phoenix Waterhammer model. I still say your calculations were too conservative. Janice's voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp, quick, and permanently seasoned with a layer of sarcasm. No gloating today, Jan, I said, leaning forward on my desk. Today I'm calling as a concerned citizen, and as a professional who is witnessing something so profoundly idiotic I think it might create a new field of physics. Ooh, color me intrigued, she said. Go on. Let me get this straight, she said after I'd given her the full, breathless rundown. Her voice was quiet, but I could hear the gears turning. Your HOA president, this Carol, is draining fully functional city-owned fire hydrants because they're ugly? She said, and I quote, "It clashes with the petunias," I replied. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I thought for a second the call had dropped. Then, I heard a sound like a deflating balloon, which I recognized as Janice trying to suppress a laugh. She failed. A loud, wheezing cackle erupted from my phone's speaker. "Oh, that's a new one!" She finally managed to get out, gasping for air. "I've heard it all. I've dealt with people trying to tap the mains to fill their swimming pools. I've dealt with sovereign citizens who claim they don't have to pay a water bill because they're not conducting commerce. But an aesthetic objection to a fire hydrant? That's going in the Hall of Fame." Her amusement faded, replaced by her usual professional crispness. "Is she aware that tampering with municipal water infrastructure is a Class 1 misdemeanor, and if it's found to endanger the public, it bumps up to a felony?" I get the feeling her personal bylaws supersede federal law in her mind, I said grimly. "Right," Janice said. "Okay, look. Officially, here's what happens. You file a formal complaint. I dispatch an inspector. The inspector verifies the situation. We issue a formal cease and desist, followed by a series of legally binding notices and fines. The whole process could take weeks, by which time this lunatic will have installed her pet rock collection all over the neighborhood." "So what's the unofficial option?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I heard the sound of typing on her end. "I'm looking at the schematics for Harmony Creek right now," she said. "You're right, it's a closed loop. Stupid design, but whatever. The whole thing is controlled by a single master gate valve just off the main trunk line. It's located under a standard iron utility plate. Looks like it's in that little grassy common area right by the entrance sign." She paused again. The silence was thick with unspoken possibilities. "Hypothetically," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if a trained and certified professional who knew how to operate a T-wrench without causing a water hammer event were to, say, open that valve for, I don't know, 3 to 4 minutes, the entire loop would repressurize to its standard 65 psi in under 5 minutes. The hydrants would be full again, ready for any pesky fires that might break out." She let the sentence hang in the air. "Hypothetically," she added, for plausible deniability. A slow smile spread across my face. It was insane. It was probably illegal. It was definitely a violation of my lease agreement with the American dream. But it was also elegant, efficient, and deeply, deeply satisfying. It was a plan that fought bureaucracy not with more bureaucracy, but with superior engineering. "Thanks, Jan," I said. "Hypothetically, that's very useful information." "Any time, Alex," she replied, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "Just, don't get caught. The paperwork would be a nightmare." I hung up the phone. The plan was born. Carol Miller wanted to play God with the water supply. She was about to find out she wasn't the only one who knew how to open the floodgates. Carol, it turned out, was not a one-trick pony. Her tyranny was multifaceted. Having successfully vanquished the Crimson Menace on the corner, she turned her attention back to the original source of her displeasure: my deck. The very next morning, a new notice was pinned to my front door. This one a bold, aggressive red that I had to assume was deeply ironic. It was a cease and desist order, addressed not to me, but to Big Mike's Construction, LLC. It cited a litany of new, creatively interpreted violations. Their generator, which powered the saws, was creating sonic discord. Their sawdust was an uncontained particulate pollutant. Their very presence, it seemed, was an affront to the delicate sensibilities of Harmony Creek Estates. The order stated that any further work would result in the company being permanently blacklisted from the HOA's approved vendor list and subject to fines. It was a declaration of total war, and it was her fatal mistake. She wasn't just messing with me anymore. She was messing with their livelihood. I found Big Mike and Skinny Pete packing their tools into the back of their truck, their faces grim. Big Mike was coiling an extension cord with a quiet fury, while Skinny Pete was kicking at a loose stone on the driveway. "Don't tell me you're leaving," I said, holding up the red notice. "Got no choice, man," Skinny Pete grumbled, not looking at me. "Mike says we can't risk getting blacklisted. This HOA stuff is nuts. We do a lot of work in these kinds of neighborhoods. A bad word from an HOA president can follow you." Big Mike finished with the cord and finally looked at me. His expression was like a thundercloud. He was a man of few words, a guy who communicated primarily through grunts and the precise, efficient movement of heavy objects. But his eyes were blazing. This was my moment. The recruiting the team scene from a heist movie, only with more mulch and less glamour. "She's gone too far," I said, my voice low and serious. "She's messing with my deck. She's messing with your job. That's one thing. But now she's messing with the water supply for this entire neighborhood. She's putting people in danger for the sake of landscaping." I leaned against the truck, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "This is where we make our stand. I have a plan to fix the hydrants, to undo what she did, but I can't do it alone." I looked from Mike's stoic face to Pete's anxious one. "I need a lookout, and I need someone who can handle a big-ass wrench if things get sticky." Skinny Pete's eyes went wide. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, plan? What plan? Man, I don't know. This sounds crazy. This sounds like illegal. What if we get caught? I'm not trying to get a record for some lady's flower bed issues." I was about to argue, to appeal to his sense of justice, but Big Mike held up a hand, silencing his apprentice. He stared at the red cease and desist order in my hand for a long, silent moment. He looked at my half-finished deck, a testament to his crew's hard work. He then looked over at Carol's house, where a new sign had just been planted in the lawn. A small, professionally printed notice announcing an upcoming beautification initiative. Finally, Big Mike spoke. His voice was a low rumble, like gravel being poured into a drum. "She questioned my generator," he said slowly. He then tapped a finger on the notice in my hand. "She questioned my work." He looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something dangerous in his expression. "Nobody questions my work." He paused, then asked the 5 most beautiful words I had ever heard. "What time do we start?" A grin spread across my face. Skinny Pete just groaned and buried his face in his hands, muttering, "Oh man, we're going to jail." But it didn't matter. Mike, the muscle, was in. Pete, the reluctant comic relief, would be dragged along. My army was small, but it was motivated. As if on cue, my neighbor Dave, who had been observing the entire scene from the comfort of his porch, raised his morning coffee cup in a silent salute. A moment later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Just a picture of his old, dusty police scanner app open on his tablet. The caption read, "The Eagle is listening. We'll monitor for bogeys. Godspeed, you magnificent bastard." My reluctant army had its own intelligence division. The mission was a go. Reconnaissance was the first order of business. According to Janice's intel, the master valve was located in a small, circular patch of grass that served as a common area right by the grand faux brick entrance to Harmony Creek Estates. It was a high-traffic area. We couldn't just roll up in the middle of the day with shovels and a T-wrench. We had to be subtle. The plan was for me and Skinny Pete to take an evening stroll, to pinpoint the exact location of the heavy iron plate. Big Mike, being roughly the size of a refrigerator, was deemed too conspicuous for a stealth mission. His job was to stay back and prep the equipment, which I think meant selecting his largest, most intimidating wrench. So, around dusk, Pete and I set off. He was a nervous wreck, walking with a hunched, furtive posture as if he were already on the lam. "Dude, act normal," I hissed, walking at a casual pace. "We're just 2 guys out for a walk. People do that." Normal people don't walk with the intention of committing a federal crime, Alex, he whispered frantically. I feel like I have a neon sign above my head that says about to tamper with municipal water infrastructure. Just talk about something else. Sports, the weather. It's hot, he squeaked. And the Orioles are having a terrible season. Now I'm just sad and nervous. This isn't helping. We reached the entrance. The common area was maybe 50 feet across, with a well-manicured lawn and a flower bed surrounding the Welcome to Harmony Creek sign. I scanned the grass, my eyes searching for the telltale square outline of a submerged utility cover. There, I murmured, spotting it near a large oak tree. It was flush with the ground, covered in a thin layer of turf. Perfect. We could be in and out in minutes under the cover of darkness. We were so focused on the ground that we didn't notice her until it was too late. Carol Miller's house was one of the first on the street, with a direct line of sight to our position. I glanced up and saw her, a silhouette in her picture window, phone pressed to her ear. Her posture was rigid, accusatory. She was watching us. Ah, hell, I muttered. We've been made. Made? What are we, spies? Pete whispered, his voice rising in panic. I told you this was a bad idea. Before I could tell him to calm down, a familiar vehicle turned into the subdivision. A police cruiser. It slowed as it approached us, its tires crunching softly on the asphalt. It stopped, and the driver's side window hummed down. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Jail time. A criminal record. My mother would be so disappointed. I'd never get a good cannoli again. 2 officers got out. One was young, with a serious, by-the-book expression that radiated exasperation. The other was older, maybe a few years from retirement, with a mustache and tired, knowing eyes. They ambled over to us. I recognized them from the picture on the county police website. Officer Ramirez, the young one, and Officer Gable, the veteran. Evening, gentlemen, Ramirez said, his hand resting near his belt. Mind telling me what you're doing out here? From across the street, I could see Carol, now standing on her porch, arms crossed, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She had actually done it. She had called the cops on 2 men for the crime of walking on grass. This was the moment. I could stammer, deny, and look guilty as sin, or I could go on the offensive. I chose the offensive. I adopted my best professional consultant voice, the one I used when explaining budget overruns to skeptical city council members. I straightened up, put a look of grave concern on my face, and stepped toward them. Officers, thank goodness you're here, I said, my tone dripping with relief. I'm Alex Peterson. I'm a hydrogeologist, and I live right down the street. I gestured vaguely in the direction of my house. My associate and I were just inspecting the worrying state of our community's fire suppression system. Frankly, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Officer Ramirez blinked, his prepared script clearly thrown for a loop. Sir? The hydrants, I continued, warming to the topic. They've been rendered completely non-operational. 0 PSI across the entire loop. If a fire were to break out tonight, your engines would be hooking up to dry pipes. It's a massive public safety risk, a clear violation of NFPA 24 standards for the installation of private fire service mains. I saw Officer Ramirez's eyes glaze over slightly at the mention of the NFPA code. It was a classic tactic. Baffle them with jargon. Officer Gable, however, stroked his mustache, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He glanced over at Carol's house, then back at me. Let me get this straight, Gable said, his voice a low, rumbling drawl. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder at Carol, who was now tapping her foot impatiently. She called the cops on you. He paused for effect. Because you were looking at the hydrant that she illegally drained? I gave him a solemn nod. That about sums it up, officer. I was just trying to assess the extent of the damage before elevating it to the proper authorities. Skinny Pete, to his credit, managed to nod along, his face a mask of terrified seriousness. Ramirez looked from me to Gable, then back to Carol, his expression one of pure bewilderment. He was a man of laws and procedures, and this situation had clearly departed from all known regulations and entered the realm of pure, unadulterated suburban insanity. "All right," Ramirez said finally, sighing. "There's no law against looking at a patch of grass. Just don't take matters into your own hands, sir. Let the proper authorities handle it." "Of course, officer," I said with utmost sincerity. "Wouldn't dream of it." Gable clapped me on the shoulder as they turned to leave. "You be careful now," he said, his voice a low whisper. He gave me a slow, deliberate wink. "Sounds like you've got a real fluid situation on your hands." They got back in their cruiser and drove off, not even stopping to talk to Carol, who looked absolutely incensed. We had survived, but the stakes were officially sky high. We were on the radar. Carol had shown her hand. She would use any weapon at her disposal, and we now knew with absolute certainty that our next move had to be our last. It had to be done in secret, and it had to work on the first try. The next morning, the proverbial gauntlet was thrown down. Pinned to the community message board by the mailboxes was a crisp, professionally printed flyer. The headline, in a cheerful, flowing script, read, "Join us for the Harmony Creek Beautification Initiative." Below it, the text glowed with Carol's particular brand of corporate-speak righteousness. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp, please join your neighbors in witnessing the exciting next step in our community's aesthetic evolution. We will be bidding farewell to the unsightly metal posts of the past and welcoming our new, elegant landscape features. Light refreshments will be served." "Light refreshments," I muttered, reading it over Skinny Pete's shoulder. "I bet it's just beige-colored water and unsalted crackers." "Dude, this is a ticking clock," Pete said, his voice frantic. "She's having a party to celebrate removing the hydrants. A party! Who does that?" The flyer was our deadline. She was going to have the landscapers physically unbolt the hydrants from their foundations and haul them away. Once that happened, my plan to simply repressurize the system would be useless. It was tonight or never. The darkest hour was, quite literally, just before the dawn. The weight of it settled on me as I went through my day. Every email I sent, every phone call I took, was underscored by the knowledge that in a few short hours, I would be committing a crime. A righteous crime, perhaps, but a crime nonetheless. Was I really about to do this? Was I, Alex Peterson, a man whose greatest act of rebellion to date was buying the store brand ketchup, about to become a public utility vigilante? I looked out my window at my beautiful, half-finished cedar sunset deck. I thought of the $500 fine, now ballooned with late fees. I thought of Big Mike's quiet, offended pride. I thought of the smarmy, self-satisfied look on Carol's face as the cops had driven away. Most of all, I thought of that fiberglass rock she wanted to put in place of a life-saving device. A fake rock. A monument to her own appalling taste and reckless disregard for everyone around her. The doubt evaporated, replaced by a steely resolve. Yes, I was. That evening felt heavy with unspoken tension. Big Mike showed up at my garage after dark. He wasn't carrying a toolbox. He was carrying a single, massive T-wrench, the kind used by city work crews. It was a solid bar of iron, 4 feet long. He'd borrowed it from a cousin who worked in sanitation. Next to it, he placed a crowbar that looked thick enough to pry open a bank vault. He didn't say a word, just gave a grim nod. He was ready. Skinny Pete arrived a few minutes later, looking pale. He was wearing a dark hoodie and clutching a pair of cheap walkie-talkies. For communication, he'd explained nervously. In case one of our teams gets compromised. I didn't have the heart to tell him we were one team, and our mission objective was about 20 feet wide. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dave. He'd sent a picture of a six-pack of beer sitting next to his police scanner app, which was crackling away on his tablet. The caption read, "The eagle is in the nest. The skies are clear. Godspeed, you magnificent bastard." I took a deep breath. My team, such as it was assembled. The equipment was prepped. Our intelligence chief was on overwatch. The objective was clear. I looked at Mike's grim determination, at Pete's terrified resolve, and at the absurdly large wrench sitting on my garage floor. This was it. The point of no return. We were about to launch Operation Gushing Freedom. The world is a different place at 4 in the morning. It's quieter, darker, and smells of dew and damp earth. It's also, apparently, the time that my neighborhood's most ambitious raccoons decide to host their weekly garbage can Olympics. This was the hostile environment into which my small, unqualified special ops team deployed. We moved through the shadows like the world's least competent ninjas. I was in the lead, with Big Mike lumbering silently behind me, the heavy T-wrench and crowbar clutched in one hand like they were children's toys. Skinny Pete brought up the rear, his head on a swivel, clutching his walkie-talkie like a holy relic. We looked less like a crack team of saboteurs, and more like 3 dads who had gotten very lost on their way to a very early fishing trip. "Eagle 1 to base," Pete whispered into his walkie-talkie, his voice trembling. I was Eagle 1. He was Nervous Pigeon, though he'd insisted on being called Watcher. Dave, back at his house, was base. "Base copies, Watcher." Dave's voice crackled back, thick with sleep or beer, I couldn't tell. "What's your status?" "We have a movement in Sector 4, Pete hissed. "Potential bogey, 12 o'clock. Mike and I froze. I peered into the darkness. A fat raccoon was trying and failing to pry the lid off a recycling bin. "Watcher, stand down," I muttered. "It's just a trash panda. Maintain radio silence unless it's an actual threat." We finally reached the small common area at the entrance, our boots sinking slightly into the wet grass. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows. The "Welcome to Harmony Creek" sign seemed to mock us. "Okay," I whispered, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "This is it." Big Mike knelt down and ran his hand over the grass, quickly finding the hard edge of the iron utility plate. The first hurdle. We had to get it open, quietly. "Crowbar," I said. Mike slid the tip of the massive crowbar into the thin gap between the plate and its concrete housing. He took a deep breath and heaved. The sound was not the quiet pop I had hoped for. It was a loud, agonizing screech of rusted metal scraping against concrete. It echoed through the pre-dawn stillness like a pterodactyl's mating call. All 3 of us froze, our bodies rigid with panic. We waited, listening for the sound of a window opening, a dog barking, a light flicking on. Nothing. The world remained asleep, blissfully unaware of our felony in progress. "Okay," I breathed out, my lungs burning. "Okay, we're good." With the seal broken, we were able to lift the heavy plate and slide it aside, revealing a dark, circular shaft descending into the earth. About 3 feet down, nestled in a web of pipes, was our target. The gate valve. It had a large pentagonal nut on top, designed for a special key. My T-wrench, thankfully, had the correct fitting. I lowered the wrench down into the shaft, the iron clanking softly against the side. I fitted it over the nut. "Okay," Janice said counterclockwise to open. I whispered to myself. I gripped the handle, planted my feet, and pulled. It didn't budge, it felt like it was welded shut. "Let me," Mike rumbled. He took my place, gripped the T-bar with both hands, his massive biceps bunching up under his dark sweatshirt. He let out a low grunt and threw his entire body weight into the turn. For a second, nothing happened. Then, we heard it. A deep, subterranean thunk that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of our feet. The valve had broken free. Immediately, a new sound began, a low hum, which quickly grew into a powerful, rushing roar from deep within the pipes. It was the sound of thousands of gallons of water, held back for days, now surging through the main and into the dry veins of the neighborhood's water loop. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "It's working!" I hissed, a grin spreading across my face. "Eagle 1, we have a problem." Pete's voice crackled from the walkie-talkie, frantic. "Headlights, a car is coming." Panic flared in my chest. We were completely exposed. Close it now!" I yelled at Mike. Mike, with the same powerful heave, threw his weight in the other direction. We heard another thunk as the valve seated shut. The roar of the water subsided. "Get the cover on!" We scrambled, our hands fumbling in the darkness. We slid the heavy iron plate back into place just as a car, the early morning newspaper delivery, cruised slowly past us. The driver didn't even glance in our direction. We lay flat in the wet grass, our hearts pounding, until the red taillights disappeared around the corner. We had done it. According to Janice's calculations, the 3 or 4 minutes the valve was open should have been enough. There was only one way to be sure. We crept over to the hydrant on the corner, Carol's vanquished foe. I pulled a small, adjustable wrench from my pocket and carefully fitted it onto one of the side nozzle caps. I gave it a slight turn. At first, there was just a hiss of trapped air, then a low, promising gurgle, and then a triumphant, beautiful spurt of crystal-clear water shot out, splashing onto the grass. It was full. The system was live. We scrambled back the way we came, melting back into the shadows. The entire operation, from the first screech of the crowbar to the final, victorious gurgle, had taken less than 10 minutes. We had won. Now all we had to do was wait for the show. 9 o'clock in the morning arrived with the kind of bright, sunny optimism that felt entirely unearned. I was positioned at my living room window, coffee cup in hand, a front row seat to the impending drama. It was my own personal Super Bowl, and the halftime show promised to be spectacular. A small crowd had gathered near the corner. It was Carol's inner circle, a handful of fellow HOA board members and sycophants, all dressed in their suburban best khakis and polo shirts. They were chatting amongst themselves, sipping from little paper cups. The light refreshments, I noted with satisfaction, were indeed pathetic. And there, in the center of it all, was Queen Carol herself. She was wearing a different beige pantsuit today, this one perhaps a shade more authoritative. She was holding a new clipboard, having apparently recovered from the tragic loss of its predecessor. Larry's landscaping had returned, this time with a bigger truck and a small dolly. The same bewildered-looking teenager was there, along with a grizzled older man who I assumed was Larry himself. Parked behind their truck was a second vehicle, this one carrying a single offensive object on a pallet, a large, lumpy fiberglass rock painted a truly nauseating shade of grayish-brown. Carol clapped her hands to get her audience's attention. "Welcome, everyone. Welcome," she began, her voice radiating smug satisfaction. "Today marks a new dawn for Harmony Creek. A day where we cast off the shackles of outdated, industrial ugliness and embrace a future of natural, harmonious beauty." I took a long sip of my coffee. This was better than I could have imagined. She gestured grandly toward the fire hydrant, which sat there looking stoic and red, and, to my eyes, more beautiful than ever. "We will now begin the removal of this blight. Larry, you may proceed." Larry nodded and sent the kid forward. The kid approached the hydrant with his big wrench, looking even more nervous than he had a few days ago. I could see Larry giving him instructions, pointing to the large operating nut on the very top of the hydrant's bonnet. From a plumbing perspective, this was a critical error. The kid thought he was loosening the bolts at the base, but the big nut on top? That doesn't unbolt the hydrant, that opens the main valve. The kid fitted the wrench onto the nut. He braced himself. From his porch across the street, Dave gave me a subtle thumbs up. He was holding a beer, because of course he was. The kid gave a mighty heave. It happened in glorious, cinematic slow motion. The nut turned. There was a slight, almost imperceptible shudder from the hydrant. And then the deluge. It wasn't a spurt. It wasn't a leak. It was a solid 4-inch wide pillar of water erupting straight up into the sky with the force of a geyser. It shot a good 20 feet into the air before gravity took over, collapsing into a massive, drenching cascade. The landscaping kid was blown backward onto the grass, completely soaked. The full force of the downward spray landed directly, perfectly, on top of Carol Miller. Her helmet of hair collapsed instantly. Her beige pantsuit turned a dark, pathetic brown. The papers on her brand-new clipboard dissolved into a cloud of papier-mâché confetti. She sputtered, gasped, and stood there, utterly drenched and completely humiliated as 65 psi of municipal-grade justice rained down upon her. The cronies gasped and scattered, trying to protect their polo shirts. Larry the landscaper just stood there, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. And from across the street, a sound erupted that was even more glorious than the geyser of water. It was the sound of Dave, my faithful intelligence chief, roaring with laughter. It was a deep, belly laugh, of pure, unadulterated joy, the sound of 20 years of pent-up frustration being released in one beautiful, cathartic moment. I leaned against my window, coffee cup shaking in my hand, and allowed myself the most satisfied smile of my entire life. The show was even better than I'd hoped. The beautiful chaos on the corner was short-lived. The geyser continued to blast a fountain of freedom into the morning sky, but the spectacle was soon interrupted by the arrival of a new motorcade. This one was far more official. First came a police cruiser, and I grinned when I saw who was inside. Officers Ramirez and Gable, drawn once again to the epicenter of suburban insanity. Behind them was a gleaming red fire marshal's truck, its lights off but its presence imposing. And bringing up the rear, a crisp, dark blue sedan with the official seal of the Regional Water Authority on its door. My grin widened. Janice had come through. The cavalry was here. Officer Ramirez got out of the car with a look of profound, soul-deep weariness, as if he was contemplating a career change to something less stressful, like bomb disposal. Officer Gable, on the other hand, got out with a twinkle in his eye, surveyed the scene, the erupting hydrant, the drenched and sputtering Carol, the bewildered crowd, and had to physically turn away for a moment to hide his laughter. The fire marshal, a stern-looking man with a magnificent mustache that put Gable's to shame, emerged from his truck holding, yes, another clipboard. But this one felt different. This one had the weight of actual authority. And then the passenger door of the sedan opened. Out stepped Janice. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She radiated a calm, terrifying competence. She, too, was holding a clipboard. It was a festival of clipboards. The landscaping kit had finally managed to turn the valve off, and the geyser subsided into a gurgling mess. The sudden quiet seemed to amplify the tension. All eyes were on the newcomers. Janice strode directly up to the dripping, shivering Carol. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was cold, precise, and utterly devastating. "Carol Miller?" Janice asked, though it wasn't a question. I'm Janice Riley, Deputy Director of Operations for the Regional Water Authority. We have a few things to discuss. She flipped to a page on her clipboard. First, the matter of the illegal and unsanctioned draining of a municipal fire hydrant on July 24th. That carries a fine of $5,000. Carol's jaw dropped. She opened her mouth to speak, but Janice continued, relentless. Second, the subsequent tampering with said hydrant this morning, resulting in the uncontrolled release of approximately, she glanced at the still gushing leak, 7,000 gallons of city water and counting. That's another $2,000 fine, plus the cost of the water. The fire marshal stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'm Fire Marshal Brody. My office will be citing you for willfully disabling a critical piece of public safety equipment, a Class 1 misdemeanor which, under the circumstances, we will be recommending the DA reviews for elevation to a felony charge of reckless endangerment. You put the lives of every man, woman, and child in this 200-home subdivision at risk." Carol stared at them, her face pale under its sheen of water. Her entire world of bylaws and beige-color palettes was crumbling around her, being washed away by a tide of actual, real-world consequences. "But the aesthetics," she stammered feebly. "It was a blight." Janice looked her dead in the eye. "Your aesthetic preferences do not supersede municipal, state, and federal law, Miss Miller. The Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association will be receiving a formal order to cease and desist any and all maintenance on public utilities, effective immediately, and you, personally, will be receiving these." She handed a sheaf of papers to Carol. "Summonses, fines, and a bill for the emergency crew I have to dispatch to properly service this hydrant you so thoughtfully tried to beautify." It was a complete and total public takedown. Officer Gable was now openly chuckling. Officer Ramirez just shook his head, scribbling furiously in his notepad. The cronies were backing away slowly, as if Carol's bad decisions were contagious. It was over. She hadn't been defeated by me. She'd been defeated by the system she thought she could ignore. And it was so much sweeter that way. A month later, the world was a different place. The hydrants of Harmony Creek Estates remained defiantly, beautifully red. My deck was finished, a glorious monument of cedar sunset cedar. And I had a signed letter from the new HOA board exempting it from all past, present, and future aesthetic regulations. Big Mike had given me a 10% public service discount on the final invoice. "For the entertainment," he'd rumbled, with what might have been a smile. The legend of Carol Miller's downfall had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The story grew with each telling. Some said the water shot 100 feet in the air. Some said her clipboard had flown out of her hands and taken out a prize-winning rosebush. My role in it all remained a well-kept secret, known only to my small, loyal crew. Carol, facing a mountain of fines and the collective wrath of a neighborhood that now understood just how close they'd come to disaster, had put her house on the market with record speed. Rumor had it she'd moved to a high-rise condo downtown. No yard, no hydrants, and most importantly, no HOA. The HOA itself had undergone a radical reformation. The new president was a shell-shocked accountant named Stan, who just wanted people to mow their lawns and bring their garbage cans in on time. The Earth and Harmony palette was officially abolished in the first meeting. It was a quiet, bloodless coup. I was sitting on my new deck, admiring the sunset. The air was peaceful. The only sounds were the distant chirp of crickets and the clink of beer bottles. Dave was sitting across from me in a new deck chair I'd bought specifically for him. He raised his bottle in a toast. "To Alex," he said, his voice full of genuine affection. "The hero of Harmony Creek. The man who made the hydrants bleed red again." I laughed, taking a sip of my own beer. "I was just a concerned citizen, Dave, with a very specific set of skills." He grinned. "Whatever you say, kid, whatever you say." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. It was the peace I had moved here for. The quiet, suburban dream, finally realized. It had just required a brief detour into light eco-terrorism. I looked out over my perfect, tranquil backyard. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the past month. The bylaws, the beige, the sonic discord, the war waged over the color of a fire hydrant. I thought about the fiberglass rock. A strange thought drifted into my head. I leaned back in my chair, took a long swallow of cold beer, and mused aloud. "You know," I said, a faint smile on my lips, "maybe whispering sandstone wouldn't have looked so bad after all." Dave snorted, nearly choking on his beer. "Don't even joke about that," he sputtered, wiping his mouth. I smiled. He was right. "Nah," I said, looking out at the world I had helped save. The peace and quiet were finally mine, and they were glorious.